will get that posted to the website pretty quickly once the meeting is over, so that if you need to go back to something, it's there, but they're within the lower displays section of the website. There's a tab for meetings and minutes, and all of our meeting recordings are there, as well as minutes as they're approved. So this being our annual meeting is when we go through and do the executive board elections and approve our budget and staffing contract for the year. So we're going to jump into those things pretty much right away. There we go. So I'd like to list a list of our members. In 2021, we welcomed 3 new members: Deutschler Environmental, DuPage County, and the Village of Riverside. It's great to have everybody on board. And our first kind of task here is to approve the meeting minutes from the from the November 18th meeting. They were included in the agenda packet, meeting packet. If there's any questions, please feel free throughout the whole meeting to just unmute yourself and ask questions. Otherwise, it looks like I have a motion from Scott Killinger to. Sorry, Scott, was that you just raising your hand? Otherwise, I need a motion to approve the minutes as they are presented, unless we have any questions. All right, I have Scott Killinger. A second for the meetings, approving the meeting minutes. I get one more person to raise their hand. And Ed, let me just make my notes here. Launch our poll. Everybody can click their answer and hit submit. Okay, so we have 19 yeses and 2 abstains, so the minutes pass. All right, thank you, everyone. I wanted to move on to any discussion around our slate of officers and members at large for the meeting, for the executive board. We have our 3 officers continuing on in their positions: Allison from the city of Joliet, Mark from Crest Hill, and Keith from the village of New Lenox. And our members at large, Ed from Shanahan, and Pete from Lockport, and new this year will be Dustin Gallagher from Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, taking Jen Wassik's place. Any questions or discussion? If any of the board members want to chime in at all, again, just unmute yourself and add to the discussion. Okay. All right, if there are no questions or discussion, I can get a motion to accept the slate of officers as presented. I have Scott and I have Zach Brown, Scott Killinger, Zach Brown. All right, I'll launch that poll. Okay, well, we have 17 yeses and 2 abstains. So our elections as presented, our slate as presented has passed. Thank you very much. And then we're going to jump into discussions around the budget. So I'm going to go through some of the individual pages in the budget that was sent around. Again, please feel free to ask questions at any point. So we have there were a few changes to agency member dues. Originally, we had planned last year to have an increase in dues, kind of like I think it was going to be about a 2% increase across the board. Figured out really that was not necessary this year, mostly because of the new members that joined. So namely DuPage County and the Village of Riverside coming in as members. So that in and of itself increased our funds coming in. And then because of the increase in MGD, we made an adjustment to the rate, the multiplier rate. So the dollars per MGD rate was lowered because now we're splitting it across a larger number of million gallons per day discharged. So for all of our members that have wastewater treatment plants, that part of your dues went down. The second was an additional fee associated with the chloride time limited water quality standard. We're gonna have a lot of discussion on that later today. But with the Illinois Pollution Control Board passing that order in November, we're expecting it to be approved by US EPA fairly soon. And then that clock starts ticking for work that needs to be done. And so there are a number of tasks specifically related to how the Watershed Group, what the Watershed Group needs to do to support the order. So we're going to, again, get into those details later. So I created a new tab in the budget to track costs related to the chloride time limited water quality standard. And so move things like our chloride monitoring and our contract with USGS into that column, as well as, actually, I'll show that in just a minute. We'll go through those details. But so that included a slight increase in staffing, and that was related to those additional tasks. So that, yeah, increased our staffing from 1.425 to 1.475, which sounds, very particular, but it basically is adding 2 more hours to the per week to the FTE. And that FTE is spread across myself and 4 other staff that work on the project, overall on our project. So looking at this is just a summary of our budget. So the first page in the document that was sent out, this is, we've been planning on this sort of 5-year window based on our monitoring cycle. So we've been monitoring for 4 years. This is our year off as far as infield work goes for monitoring for the bioassessment. This is our year sort of to get caught up. And then we will be beginning that process again, that cycle again next year. So, each, to kind of make things work out from the budget, having this 5-year cycle, each previous year, we've basically taken about $50,000 and set it aside, and kind of basically moving it forward here. It worked out to, so our cost is coming in slower than we don't spend all of our monitoring money each year because of the way the length of time that it takes to get all of the analysis done and the reports completed. Those MBI contracts extend over a number of years. And so being able to use this 5th year of income kind of split across all 5 years for the total budget. So that's kind of how this line item shows up here. And then really just sort of minor changes in the other pages of the budget. The way that gets reflected in dues. So again, mentioning that I think we were at 2236 for the MGD rate. So that made some minor changes in this column. We added in an additional 10 MGD with DuPage County Knollwood plant coming online. So that made some minor changes here in the dues calculation. And then again, this was the chloride, what we added in for chlorides. And I highlighted the various members that are petitioners within the chloride time limited water quality standard, part of that petition. And that's where those costs are associated with those entities. So overall, the difference in dues from what last year's dues were, included that here. So it varied from organization to organization. So depending on the size of your treatment plant and how much that decrease was, sometimes offset what the increase was related to the chloride variance section or line item here. And then there was a larger decrease here for MWRD because we ended up removing the Lamont plant from the calculation. So their MGD went down here. The Lamont plant is actually being worked into the Narp or the Chicago area waterways. So it really made sense for that plant to be associated there and not part of this watershed group. So that was why MWRD's numbers went down by quite a bit. Okay, so I thought I actually had oh, sorry, I did not have the table for the chloride tab. So we'll go back to this just for a moment. So again, there was a small increase associated with staffing. We included the USGS contract, funds for additional chloride monitoring, and then we started putting funds into what we're calling a reevaluation fund. So as part of the 5-year period for the variance, there is in year 4.5, we need to do a reevaluation and present that back to the board. We've had some initial discussions with Margaret Conway from MWRD, the attorney from MWRD that has been working on this over the last several years, just to sort of get some input on her thoughts. We want to be prepared that if we need to hire an attorney to assist us with this part, that we will have funds. So we're looking to build up some funds each year in this line item to have available if we, like I said, either hiring an attorney or if we need any additional like data analysis done by an outside consultant, that we have funds. And that's also something that we'll be working on in partnership with the Chicago Area Waterways Chloride Work Group. So we'll be able to share those costs as well. But again, want to be prepared for that. So that is where the increase comes in for this line item here, the 13,180. So there are questions. Anybody have questions on the budget, any of the other pages that were included? Again, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions.
Hi, just curious, should we expect to receive an invoice for the amount that our individual group owes, or will we have to work off the spreadsheet?
Yeah, no, as once the budget is approved, our fiscal year starts on March 1st. And generally sometime by about the end of March, early April, we'll be sending invoices out to all members. That will, include any, well, it'll be the invoice and a copy of our W-9 and a copy of the application form that we have. So basically, if there's any updated information on contacts or things like that, we include all that together. And the point person who was identified for the organization is who will email that information to.
Understood. Thank you.
No problem. All right, any other questions about the budget? All right, I will launch our poll. All right, so I guess first, can I get a motion to approve the budget as it has been presented? Scott Killinger. And Ed Dolezal. Okay, we have 19 yeses and 4 abstains. So our motion passes. Okay, so based on the budget being passed, we've updated our contract that the Conservation Foundation has between or with the Lower Des Plaines Watershed Group to provide staffing and support. So changes to the contract, really no substantial changes, just updating the dates, the dollar amount that was reflected in the budget, and then an update to kind of the list of tasks for 2022-23. So that's the last page of the contract, and that was included in the meeting packet. If there are any questions about the contract or any of the items in it, again, please just unmute yourself and ask questions. Okay, no questions. Can I get a motion to pass the staffing contract as presented of Jen Wassick and Zach Brown? Punch the poll. This will be our last poll for today. We're done with the business part of things. Okay, I have 18 yeses and 3 abstains. Motion passes. All right, thank you very much. And we're going to get into the rest of our meeting here to kind of go over some of the things that we worked on over the last year, some of our plans for 2022, as well as get to share this presenting here with Hannah Miller from our staff to talk about chloride, time limited water quality standards and the work that we're doing on that. And then Leah Brodberry talking about our education and outreach materials that we've worked on over the past year and what we have coming up for this year. So this was our 4th year of our bioassessment sampling. We worked on the remaining tributaries, mostly located in Will County, with a couple of we have Flag Creek and Sawmill Creek in DuPage County, 14 tributaries altogether. We did all of our fish and macrovertebrate sampling, habitat, water chemistry, collected sediment chemistry at a subset of those sites. We also completed 12 expanded dissolved oxygen sites where we put out the DO probes for 1 to 2 week long deployments, collected both systonic, so in the water, chlorophyll A, and benthic chlorophyll A off the bottom off the rocks, and additional nutrient parameters in addition to what we normally collect for the bioassessment. And all that data is really to help us as we work on developing our Narp, so better understanding how nutrients are functioning in our watershed. We also collected fecal coliform. So those are 5 samples in 30 days to meet the criteria for the Illinois EPA standards. We did that at 5 sites. Basically, this is associated with the MS4 sampling requirements. And so, we're really targeting where the segments that are listed for fecal coliform. We did not have any segments listed for fecal coliform on the tributaries that we were working on. So we picked up some additional segments that we haven't sampled yet on the displays that are listed for fecal coliform. We'll continue to do that work next year. So some of the other tasks outside of monitoring that we worked on over this last year was meeting with dischargers kind of mid-year to talk about a phosphorous target based on what came out of the IPS model. So this has been work kind of in concert with the RCW and the Lower DuPage using this model as a way to develop our targets for the Narp. We worked with DRCW to develop a survey that went out to members on leaf litter and street sweeping practices. We will still be actually asking for folks who haven't completed that survey to do so. We'll talk a little bit about that as some of our work for 2022, but this is a way for us to meet our non-point source component for the Narp. We updated and distributed the salt use survey, still waiting for some additional responses on that. And we began work, again, this is some of the stuff Hannah will be talking about work on developing templates for both the chloride pollutant minimization plan and how to document your programs so that you have all the information you need for annual reporting. So those things are out and under review by the Chloride Committee. We've started to work on drafting a chloride reduction plan for the Lower Des Plaines watershed. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in another slide. We completed our financial audit, provided reporting for our MS4 activities, as well as our special conditions report that also should have been here on the list. Those again will be completed in 2022. So those generally by the end of, before the end of March, those reports will be updated and completed for 2021's work. Some of the key things in our outreach, we developed our joint website with the Lower DuPage. There's a lot more expanded information on it and more information about what we do, as well as information to share with residents. We added more topics for our outreach materials and working with some of the other watershed groups in the region, held our de-icing workshops, more than 930 participants this year, and then also continuing on with the winter technical brief webinars. So we're going to move on to the chloride time-limited water quality standard. Hannah's going to kind of explain where things are at with that and the work that we're doing, but just want to let folks know that we've added some information to the website about the new water quality standard. So you can find it if you're anywhere in the Lower Des Plaines watershed group and click on our work. It can also be found at the bottom of any of the pages. And then once you're on this page here, just click on the chloride variant. So we've updated information as far as where things are at and added some links to the board order, some of the updates. There was an update in January that the board posted that Hannah's going to talk about. And then also there's a summary that Hannah's going to talk about that we put together So those things are also linked here. And then we also have a new page that we just got up for the chloride committee. So as we're sharing information, working with the committee, information will be there and you can link to it from this page. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Hannah. And Hannah is like I work for the Conservation Foundation, contracted with Lower DuPage and Lower Des Plaines. Hannah also works for the Conservation Foundation and is contracted to work with the newly formed Chicago Area Waterways Chloride Work Group. So we'll be working very closely together on all of these activities related to the chloride time limited water quality standard. Hannah, it's all yours.
Awesome. So morning, everybody. So again, Jennifer said, I'm Hannah Miller. I'm working with the Chicago Area Waterways Chloride Work Group. So what I'm just going to do is just sort of do a kind of a brief talk through of the time limited water quality standard for chloride, which is also has been previously known as the chloride variance. But from here on out, we're going to do our best to refer to it as either the chloride TLWQS or the time limited water quality standard for chloride. Since it's not a variance anymore, it's now a time limited water quality standard. And so this is, and I want to also say, Jennifer, please jump in at any point. If you need to help me out here. So it's a watershed based variance specifically for chloride. And so it's just limited to portions of the Lower Des Plaines watershed and the Chicago Area Waterway system. So it doesn't cover the whole area, it just covers portions of that. And so I know you guys are very familiar with this, but I'm just going to kind of do just that quick rundown anyway. So the Illinois Pollution Control Board passed this chloride TLWQS back in November. And then they also issued an update to this, which came from an attorney emailed in some comments and questions related to it, and they included it as a motion for clarification. And so the Illinois Pollution Control Board issued an update clarifying some of the points from the attorney's email. They did not do all of the points, but they did do some of those points. And that came out in early of January 2022, which was earlier this month. So we updated all of our information related to that from what their information update was. They made some changes to the way the order was structured, and I'll kind of talk through a little bit of that in a minute. The step that we're at now is that IEPA will now submit the order from the board to the US EPA for US EPA's approval. Sort of our understanding is that once the US EPA approves this, sort of the chloride variance will become official. And when that happens, IEPA will then write permits. We're hoping that that can happen much closer together simultaneously, if not kind of right back to back, so that there's a little bit of less of a jump to that, but we'll kind of have to wait and see how that shakes out. The total term of the chloride variance is 15 years, and there will be, as Jennifer mentioned, that reevaluation every 5 years. Go ahead and switch slides for me. Cool. So just sort of some of these, there's some highlights from this. We did send out a document that went out, I believe, in the meeting information for this meeting and also to the chloride committee that we had put together for both the cause watershed work group and this work group, of just some summary, some highlights, just some information, things that are important that you do need to recognize and need to know. And so I'm just going to talk through some of these points out of that document. So each petitioner or discharger has to participate in one of these two chloride work groups. So if you fall into both watershed groups, I know there's some folks in the cause group that did fall that way and some groups in the Lower Des Plaines group that fell that way. You only need to participate in one of those work groups. Each petitioner has to submit annual reports to IEPA and the work group each year by July 1. And each petitioner must prepare a pollutant minimization plan. These are for your operations, implementing all the identified BMPs. We'll try and talk through what this timeline is going to be. The PMP needs to be submitted within 6 months of the US EPA's approval. So that's something that we've been working on, and I'll talk through a little bit more about what we've been doing with that a little bit later on. So these is kind of a general overview of the BMPs, just to kind of give you an idea. It's a lot of best management practices related to your winter maintenance operations, and a lot of good general good housekeeping things related to your winter maintenance operations. Based on some of our salt survey results so far that I've been looking through, pretty much everybody is already going through a lot of these, or using a lot of these BMPs already in their operations, which is great. So there's a lot, but there's still some work that needs to be done with some communities, and some folks need to implement more than others. And so our work groups can kind of help folks work through that process. Oh, and also all of these BMPs are also included in that document that we sent out. We gave you the full table, which has all this very specific language for these BMPs.
Yeah, and that table or that summary is also linked now on the chloride variance page.
So just talking through some of these important milestones. So 6 months after the approval, your PMPs will be due. And then you also need to establish a way to track the icing salt usage. So one of the things that I'll talk about later is a template for tracking de-icing salt usage. So we're kind of trying to help get people started with that deadline, as we know that, especially with this 6 months after the approval, that kind of comes up really quick. What got added to the official order from the opinion, it was very, very deeply in the opinion in a very single sentence, was that this was from the January update, that 12 months after the approval, the petitioners have to implement all applicable BMPs pursuant to their individual PMPs and that table 3 of those BMPs. So we're still working out exactly what that is going to look like and what that means. So that's kind of still up in the air exactly what our understanding is of that. But kind of from the surveys, a lot of folks are already doing a lot of these BMPs already. So we're hoping this isn't going to be too much of an issue. At November 30th of each year, you must have completed annual training of all your staff related to salt operations. So that's your winter operations. And you must complete calibration of all of your equipment. That starts in year 2. And then again, by July 1 of each year, starting year 2, submitting these reports. All this information, we've laid out the milestones in that summary document for you. So you should have a copy of that. Go with the next slide. Okay. So the work group is going to be providing some very specific assistance related to the chloride TLWQS. We are starting with a chloride and salt use survey. If you haven't completed the survey and you're a petitioner, please do as soon as possible. That would be really helpful as we kind of worked through creating these PMPs and talking about documentation and looking kind of through those quick deadlines that need to come up. I think there's a couple people we're still missing. So just double check, make sure you've completed that survey. We're also working through the PMP framework and wanting to create consistency across both work groups and all of the petitioners for the PMP. So that's one thing we're working on kind of jointly together with both work groups. We're putting together a documentation template for work group members to use if they don't already have a good system in place to track their de-icing salt use, as that milestone comes up pretty quick. As you know, we do education and outreach materials related to chlorides. We're also working on, at least the cause work group is helping to support. I don't know, Jennifer, how you've worked this in with Lower Des Plaines or what they know about this yet, but the cause work group is helping to support the Salt Smart Parking Lots and Sidewalks Winter Maintenance Training and Certification Program. This will be helpful for petitioners, contractors, et cetera, who specifically do parking lots and sidewalks, so that you can say that those folks are Salt Smart certified, which means that they're following the same BMPs that as a petitioner, you're required to follow as well, just so that you guys have a brief update on that. We also are going to continue with those regional maintenance training workshops, help you meet that requirement for the annual training each year. We'll be providing some annual reporting support, and including with that, with the submittal of the work group status reports at years 3, 8, and 13, that'll compile all the annual report information from the work group members. That status report goes to the IEPA and I think the Illinois Pollution Control Board. Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, or is that
I think the annual reports just go to IPA. Or
okay,
that status
the
report.
big status report.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the status report goes to IEPA, and then each year at years 4.5, 9.5, 14.5, we'll be doing the big reevaluation to the Illinois Pollution Control Board, which will include any other BMPs that the work groups identify that will help further reduce chlorides.
Yeah, and at this point, it's assessing all of the data that had been collected to support reevaluation, or to support basically continuing on with this time-limited water quality standard. And so that's where I mentioned that Hannah and I have been in some conversations with folks at MWRD since they've obviously had the initial experience of putting this together. This is definitely something that we'll be talking with Illinois EPA to figure out sort of exactly what the process will be so that we're prepared for it in year 4.5.
Okay. All right, so then we'll keep going. I'll do a kind of a brief overview here of the salt use surveys that have been returned across both work groups. We've gotten 28 surveys. We also collected copies of the snow and ice plans, any policies we have related to that, and application rates. And just kind of give you a kind of a quick overview of some of these results. We've had a total of, for the last, essentially the last 4 winters, not including this winter, over 1,300,000 tons of salt used across this watershed, across both watersheds. And it's about 5 to 8 respondents didn't have any records for, depending upon the year. Some didn't have records at all, some didn't have records for certain years. So that's one of the reasons why we were putting together that documentation template to help bring all the communities together to have consistency for the reporting, and also make some of that reporting easier down the road. Our survey questions included very specific chloride TLWQS items, so that we can kind of identify where our work group members were. So to use this as a baseline to help establish just some good information to help guide our work going forward. We also wanted to kind of figure out a way to help give you credit for any of the BMPs that you've already been implementing and sort of how long you've been implementing them, so that we can make sure that come reporting time, we can make sure that those communities that may not be making as big of a decrease, there's a good reason why, that you may have already been implementing them in your community. So we're going to work and figure out the best way we can do to kind of help give you credit for doing that. We're also using the survey We're also using the survey results to help guide our PMP framework, especially using the submitted snow and ice plan. So thank you to those who did submit that. That was really helpful to have. Helping use those survey results also help guide documentation, sort of help keep that in line with what documentation communities are already keeping and what actually will be useful to them. Again, we want this to be, all this information, all these items to be helpful and useful to you. Yep, continuing on. So I'll get back to that documentation template. So we created a draft of this. I believe this got sent out to the Chloride Committee for comments.
Yes.
If you already have a documentation setup that you really love and you really like, by all means, please keep using that one. We certainly don't need to replace what we've put together with what you already have that works. But what we would ask is that you please provide us comments back on this documentation template, as there are communities that will need to use this to help keep up with their reporting. So we would love to hear what works for you so that we can help incorporate that in. And if you have any comments, questions, et cetera, that'd be really great to hear back. We did include it in both a spreadsheet form and a printable form, since I know that not everybody is super tech savvy. That way you've got something that you could just print, keep on a clipboard, and have something easy to fill out and reference back come report time. It includes specific key items that are needed for this annual reporting, so that it's easy that you already are maintaining these items, you've got them ready to go come report time. So it's easy to kind of have it all compiled together right there. And again, please give us comments back. We'd really want to make sure that this is going to be something that is going to work for everyone. It's going to be something that you're going to, that those communities that may need it are actually going to be able to use it. So any comments back would be really helpful. Okay, Jennifer, next one. So our pollutant minimization plans, we started talking about this earlier in the summer with the Chloride Committee and also with the cause work group. We're creating a draft of this PMP to help create that consistency across both work groups and create the consistency across all of the petitioners. It'd be great if everyone kind of on the same page with what kind of information that's included in this document. We used again, like I said before, we used this from the submitted snow and ice plans to kind of help build this document. We also looked at pollutant minimization plans from other states that were specifically geared at legacy pollutants like mercury to help kind of guide what kind of other information and other items might need to be included in this document. So it includes very specific chloride TLWQS milestones as well. And it includes all the BMPs from the chloride TLWQS, as that's really important, as that was one of the key items that your PMP must include all of those items as part of your agency's implementation of these BMPs. So the way that it's kind of set up is that we have those BMPs that you're currently implementing, and you give a brief description of what you're currently doing with those BMPs. And then you would also include your plan to implement any of the BMPs that are included in the chloride TLWQS that you're not implementing, and include that plan of how you're going to implement those items. This would be sort of to compare both your snow and ice plan to this document. Your snow and ice plan would more reflect your current operations, and your PMP would reflect more of your planning document, your planning information.
Yeah, and I think one other thing, and I think I mentioned this when I would send out stuff to the chloride committee, is that once your PMP is put together, it may require you to make some updates to your snow and ice plan to make sure they're up to date and that they're a good reference document. So that kind of the way it's laid out is that, you know, for the things you currently are doing, you can refer back to your snow and ice plan. And then, like Hannah said, the things that are, you know, being planned, those details will go in the PMP. So you want your snow and ice plan to be definitely up to date and reflective of what you're currently doing.
So we are sharing both of the PMP with both work groups because we want to get the feedback from all of the petitioners as much as possible. So please submit that feedback from, especially those chloride committee members. That would be really helpful to make sure that this document is going to work for you. Because work group requested a document that was going to be a bit more plug and chug, something that they would be able to kind of have a template to work from, something that was going to be easier to be done in-house without necessarily the help of an outside consultant if they needed that. So that was just something that was a specific request. So that was kind of one of the ways we built that document as well. And we are going to be reaching out to staff at IPA to make sure that the PMP framework will meet their needs. We don't want to be having you guys complete some document and then have to come back and say, well, the IEPA said no. So we're wanting to make sure that it's going to work for you guys first, and then make sure that IEPA is going to be okay with that.
Cool.
All right, next one.
Yep. Actually, I think that's your last slide, Hannah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. Yeah, and so our next chloride committee meeting is on February 15th at 9 a.m. It's on Zoom. I've sent stuff out to the chloride committee, materials for to review and things. If you are not on that committee and you would like to be, please just drop me an email and I can get you added to the list and send materials out. And like I said, we just created the chloride committee page on the website. So that once we kind of get through and have like documents that we're ready to share and things like that, we'll have a place to put it. And I'll try to keep that also updated as far as future meetings. Hannah and I have also discussed potentially holding some joint meetings between the chloride committee and members of the Chicago Area Waterways Chloride Work Group, so that we can have some of these discussions kind of simultaneously versus kind of holding one meeting and then another meeting and trying to go back and forth between comments. So we'll discuss that at the February 15th meeting and see how we might be able to line up some of our meetings with cause, just to make this a little bit smoother so that we're really ready to go. I've been talking to some of the attorneys that have been involved. You know, they don't see any reason why US EPA wouldn't pass this. So it really could come at any time, and we want to be ready to really have this to move forward with when that clock starts ticking. And any questions about any of this stuff, again, just you can email me or Hannah, and both of us, we can definitely get the answers that we know at this point. And I will. The link to the summary document is also on that chloride time limited water quality standard page on the website. So if you're looking for that, and I can also send it out again to the whole work group. Okay, I was going to jump into some discussions around the Narp as we are really getting kind of down to the wire here on pulling our product together. I pulled some language specifically from, well, in summary, because there's kind of a lot to read through on some of the wastewater treatment plant permits. We have two deadlines really listed in permits, both the end of 2023 and the end of 2024, but we will be completing this document by the end of 2023. So for those of you that have the 24 deadline in your permit, this will be completed as of the end of 2023. It clearly states that the Narp shall be supported by data and sound scientific rationale, so we can't just make stuff up or just base it on a couple of points of data. They're really looking for effort to be put into the targets that are put into the plan. The language allows permittees to work with other stakeholders in the watershed to determine the most cost-effective means to address the phosphorus-related impairments. So that really the goal is not just to have a target for phosphorus. The goal is to actually meet or to address those impairments that are related to phosphorus in the waterways. In determining the target level, it's not necessarily just phosphorus, although that has been the focus at this point. So looking at, that's why we're collecting information about dissolved oxygen and some of the other components. So not just total phosphorus, but dissolved phosphorus and orthophosphorus and CBOD and other kind of nutrient components within the water column, so we can have a good understanding about how the nutrient cycle is functioning. And then the permittees have the option to either utilize the recommendation by the NSAC committee of 0.1 milligrams per liter for phosphorus, or to develop its own watershed target level. At this point, we are looking to develop our own watershed specific target. So it's identifying phosphorus input reductions both by point sources and non-point sources. So assessing, the impacts of phosphorus or the amount of phosphorus, looking at what reductions could be at both point source and non-point sources, as well as, and it says, in addition to other measures necessary to remove those impairments. So that kind of opens the door for like restoration projects or a dam removal project or something like that, as an example. So there is, it doesn't have to just happen at the point source or non-point source, like stormwater discharges. Based on the data, we could determine that we really don't have impairments related to phosphorus, in which case we wouldn't need to make any reductions. But the Narp could also determine really any combination. This is where I really summarize things, but any combination of point source reductions or non-point source reductions, or just doing these other measures necessary, or any combination of those. So there's a lot of leeway in exactly how we address those phosphorus reductions. It does need to include a schedule of the implementation of the various input reductions that are put into the plan, both for point, non-point, and other measures. And the schedule needs to be implemented as soon as possible and identify specific timelines for permittees. Actually says that you, as a permittee, once the Narp is completed, need to contact IEPA within 90 days to incorporate any action items that come out of the Narp if they fall, within your current permit. And then the language also states that the Narp can include provisions for water quality trading. So it's an option that's out there. The IEPA has not given a specific table of contents or list of things that must be in your NARP. They've tried to leave that up to the individual permittees or watershed groups as to how they're going to address it. We're going from NARPs that are happening in very urbanized watersheds here in the northeast part of the state, all the way out into some fairly rural watersheds where it may be just one discharger in the watershed, and their NARP is going to look very different than our NARP is going to. So there's some definitely benefits in not having a specific list of tasks, but then it does leave kind of some question as to, do we have everything that IEPA wants to see? So currently, kind of the proposed NARP components, and this, we will have a lot of discussion on this, over this year. But kind of the components that we're looking at currently would, kind of be that introduction. So all the watershed information, existing data, and what we based our assessments on. Those tasks, I'll get into that in a moment. Information about the IPS model. So that is the model that we're using as the basis for our target for phosphorus. And so, we'll have all the information that is associated with that model and how those targets were developed. Analysis of our DO the criteria, but like how DO is functioning within our streams and how, how that works in with our kind of nutrient cycle, how our nutrient levels or different components of nutrients are impacting DO. So kind of what that relationship is. We'll have a component on the non-point source analysis. So where sources of phosphorus are coming on the non-point source side of things, and what, if any, reductions could or should be made on the non-point source side of things. We'll have a lot of discussion still on whether or not a trading program will be needed. Right now there is some trading that is happening between, like, with the plant, the option to have some trading happening like between Joliet's plants. Like, that's already there. If that's working, we don't need to, complicate things. But if once we really know where our target number is and what it'll take dischargers to get there, and determine, like, will there even be any sellers? If we don't have any sellers, then there really isn't much of a point for developing a trading program. So those are, some of the discussions that we'll be having as we narrow in on the target. We will have information about our, continued monitoring program that will be in place, and we'll have a work plan for addressing the main stem displays. So as we've discussed in the past, the IPS model is focused specifically for wadable streams. And so this is kind of the easiest place to start as far as creating that target, because there's a lot of data that's already out there on wadable streams, and pulled into the IPS model. We have data from across all northeastern Illinois. So those targets are very applicable to our tributary streams. Because there's many fewer large rivers in Illinois, there is a lot less data and information about really how phosphorus is working within these systems. And then on top of that, the various like the implementation schedules for phosphorus removal at plants on the displays, all of those are really coming into play either very recently or very soon. And so wanting to see how those phosphorus reduction efforts that are on target right now are impacting the displays. So that'll all go into kind of that work plan. And we really are looking at seeing that work plan as the task that comes into the next kind of 5-year round. Because the NARP being due at the end of 2023 is not the end of things. Really, the end of things is when we no longer have phosphorus-related impairments within the watershed. So this is, definitely being seen as an ongoing process. So this work plan, we'll develop what that work plan is going to be, but then implementing that work plan is really looking at being targeted for the next round of the Narp plan. So tasks for 2022. So we'll still be doing a fair amount of kind of work in partnership with DRCW and the Lower DuPage. Some of the work that they are doing with looking at those IPS model targets and plugging it into some Qual 2K modeling that they are doing within the east and west branches of DuPage, the main stem DuPage, and in Salt Creek. That information will be very helpful as we start looking at, so right now the target or the threshold for phosphorus in the IPS model is 0.28 milligrams per liter that's an in-stream threshold. And so what does that mean when we're trying to create a target for, a number that would be put in a wastewater permit? So they're running different numbers through those Qual 2K models. At this point, we think those models will be very applicable to our streams. The challenge with the lower Des Plaines is just the sheer number of tributaries that we have. And, I don't know that we would get much different results if we were running Qual 2Ks in every one of those watersheds. And just to sort of give you some scale on cost, like the model for Lower DuPage is coming in at like $68,000 to complete that model. And so to do models on all of our tributaries would be incredibly expensive and likely not give us a very different result. So we're going to continue to work with BRCW and Lower DuPage and looking at what their model outputs are. And then again, meeting with dischargers this year again to discuss what that target is. And the goal is to really kind of get to a target that everybody is comfortable with, that then we can bring to IEPA. Our plan is by September to make sure that they are on board with what we are looking at. We'll be assembling the whole watershed information existing data section, get that all done this year. So there'll be work between Alex Handel and I on staff, as well as with Dina DeHulik, and really pulling all of the information, the data, the GIS maps and things like that all together, have that task just done and out of the way. There's some additional data analysis that I would like to work with DRCW and Lower DuPage on. All of our data was all collected in the same way. We all worked together doing the expanded DO monitoring this past summer, all the chlorophyll A data, nutrient data. And so working with NBI to have a good understanding of what that data is telling us. And that really will kind of lead into that assessment component for the Narp and help to guide both what data we need to continue to collect so we can continue to understand our issues. And then also it will also help us to determine, are these impairments really coming from point sources, from non-point sources? Are there other structural things in the stream that are adding to those impairments? And so this should help us to start kind of teasing that information out of the data. I'd mentioned the leaf litter and street sweeping survey that we had sent out last, I guess late last summer, early fall. There's still a number of communities we'd like to get that data from. And then we'll be working with staff and potentially through a contract with Baxter and Woodman that we approved last fall to analyze the data, utilize a model that was developed in Minnesota. We had a presentation on that last year to take the information that we know about our practices and be able to put some numbers to how much phosphorus we currently are already removing with these practices, as well as how adjustments to these practices could maybe increase those removal rates. And then that will kind of fulfill our non-point source component of the Narp. This is definitely a very small piece of phosphorus, of where phosphorus is coming from, the amount of phosphorus that is captured through these practices versus what comes out of a wastewater treatment plant. But as to meet that requirement, we do need to at least look at this analysis, and then kind of really determine what practices or suggestions that we may put as action items within the NARP. Again, really working on determining what that work plan looks like for the main stem, and that may actually include hiring a consultant to help complete this task. So we'll have some discussions on that. And then overall, our plan is to have a draft of the NARP for review by mid-2023. So due in as a final document to IEPA at the end of 2023, but we have lots of entities that we want to make sure have the opportunity to review the full document. We want to make sure we have enough time for that. So a lot of work this year on NARP to get us to where we need to be so that we can have that good final draft ready by mid-2023. Some of the other tasks that we have for 2022 is to continue working with NBI to complete bioassessment reports. So we have some GIS work analysis that Alex is working on, basically some background information to provide so NBI staff can plug in our information or compare it to the IPS model thresholds. We can get that assessment done for all of our tributary sites. We will continue to do dissolved oxygen monitoring, as well as the fecal coliform monitoring during this summer here. We have a lot of work with the Chloride Committee, which a number of things that Hannah just discussed. And then we would definitely like to be meeting with several of our member communities to evaluate our outreach materials and formats, topics like how are communities using this information, if they're not using it, like what are there things that we could be doing differently, so that this information really is useful to as many communities as possible. We'll continue to host our winter de-icing workshops to meet those annual training requirements. One thing that, I guess that is up there in the, skip right over it. So the work that Hannah mentioned with the Chloride Committee, but then specifically another task in there is been working on a draft chloride reduction plan. And this would basically be more of a guidance document for the areas that are not part of the time limited water quality standard, as well as folks who are, or entities that are not involved in that petition, so they're not petitioners. So it'll include discussions around, all of the BMPs that are in the TLWQS, but whereas in the TLWQS, those are requirements. In this plan, these will be discussion points about how to improve your chloride reduction or improve your winter de-icing operations to reduce chlorides and minimize impacts. But it is not, doesn't have like the teeth that the TLWQS has. This really helps us in a couple of different ways. One, through the TLWQS, we are looking to meet targets to reduce chlorides. And it was somewhat voluntary as to who participated in that petition. But if we don't have these practices being implemented across the watershed, it's going to be difficult to meet those targets. So this is meant to help support communities and really try to get more of these practices implemented across the board, wherever we can. The MS4 permits also have listed in there that, if there is a chloride reduction plan for the watershed that you are in, that is something that you need to participate in. So putting a plan together will help fulfill, kind of provide that to those other MS4 communities as some guidance on what they can be doing to reduce their chloride impact. And then another piece is that working with MWRD and their Curie plant. The Curie plant is not part of the TLWQS area, but they are being asked to look at reducing chloride impacts. And so one of the ways that they're looking to do that is through providing guidance on chloride reduction for the communities that they service. So really wanting to have something that would be consistent across the watershed is really where this chloride reduction plan comes in. So I have a draft of it nearly complete, and it will be going out to the chloride committee for review before our February 15th meeting, and then we'll probably get it out for a wider review after that. Okay, so I think that gets through kind of what our tasks are for 2022. We definitely have a busy year with a lot going on, so you'll definitely be hearing from several of our staff reaching out for information and asking for comments as we move forward on a lot of these items. So I'm going to turn things over to Leah to just talk about what we've been working on the education and outreach side. So this really is kind of a summary of things that you've seen if you've been participating in these meetings throughout 2021, but just to kind of get everybody up to date on what we've been working on and what we'll be planning for 2022. So Leah.
Great. Yeah, a quick review of what the outreach activities in 2021. Jennifer mentioned earlier, but main thing we did was a complete overhaul of our website. It's a joint website now with the Lower DuPage crew. A main goal of ours was to make our website more approachable for a general audience. So how can we talk about chlorides and nutrients in a way that residents can understand? So we have some pages now dedicated that are informational, educational pages. If you need to find any member resources at the top of the page, the top of the header, there's a dark blue button that says Lower Des Plaines Watershed Group. So you can find those chloride pages in that section, as well as meeting and minutes and things like that. So here's a little kind of collage of some of the features of the new website. Some of those educational sections include what we're calling Watershed U, which is just general information about what makes a healthy watershed, pages on what we're monitoring in our rivers and tributaries, and then also what residents can do at home to benefit water quality. So we kind of take our outreach materials and model them on those pages. We also have a blog section where we post all our blogs, so you can link directly to those. And then another thing we're doing is just showing more pictures, highlighting what the watershed looks like in all of our member communities. So if you have a nice picture of the river or tributaries, send them to me and I'd like to highlight those on our website. And then all our outreach materials are housed there. So you can go to ldpwatersheds.org/outreach, or if you scroll to the bottom of any page, an outreach, links to the outreach materials are there. And on that outreach page, we kind of group everything by topic. So you can see in that on the right, some of our offerings there. And then what we did in 2021, I'll go through that next. So they're organized by season, and our topics usually relate to what's happening in that season. So in the spring, we often talk about stormwater. This year, we focused on native plants and rain gardens. And then also we've been incorporating some outreach on ecology, what's living in our rivers and streams. And so we talked about how mussels are indicator species for water quality, and then how they also improve the health of our rivers by filtering water themselves. And so we talk about native plants because they help infiltrate and filter stormwater, but this is completely new to some people, or they don't have any experience with landscaping. So a project we did this year was to create a native plant garden from start to finish at the Conservation Foundation's headquarters. And so this was around our office building. We, through blog posts, a couple webinars, and other materials, our goal was to take people through each step of creating a garden like this. So how do you choose native plants for your space? How do you have something that is functional but also looks good? So there's a lot of webinar just focused on how we designed our garden to look the best, how to create new garden beds, and then some tips on planting and maintaining those new gardens. And that's something we talked about throughout the year. In the summer, we focused on responsibility. It's kind of our theme. So in the river, how can we be responsible when we go out and enjoy the river on a canoe or kayak? Everything that we bring into the river should come out. And a few more tips were featured on this poster, as well as individual graphics seen in the middle. And then we also have our pet waste campaign that we kind of did a 4-week social media campaign on, where we shared fun pictures and graphics. And we also have pet waste signs available, you see in that lower corner. So if you would like a pet waste sign or a bag dispenser, let me or Jennifer know, and we can get those to you. Next slide. In the fall, we always talk about leaf litter and the nutrients from leaves. This year, we kind of traced the path of where the nutrients in leaves go. So if you manage your leaves at home, if you're using them as a resource, they go directly into your yard when you mulch your flower beds with them or compost them. If you participate in a leaf collecting program, they will then go to a composting facility or to farmland. But if residents don't manage their leaves at all, they often end up in streets, in storm drains, and those nutrients get brought into our waterways. We have a few materials on that topic. And then in the winter, it's still winter now, so I encourage you to use any of these resources. We have materials on anti-icing. So how can we use more efficient techniques to keep our roads safe? And so shifting away from covering our sidewalks and parking lots with a ton of rock salt, and integrating techniques like anti-icing. And then we also focus on the impacts of salt. So they affect our plants, they affect infrastructure, and they can even hurt our pets. So those are kind of our topics. And then we created a series of posters and even a fun comic about that as well. One message we're trying to get across is that before you grab the salt, can you clear that surface as best as you can with a broom, a shovel, a scraper, before you then scatter the salt? That's trying to get that across. And then next slide. Another thing is we're trying to recognize the great job our public works is doing to help keep us safe in the winter. And so part of that is recognizing that there are people who drive our snowplows and that they work really hard throughout the season. It can be, as Dan says, plowing can be dangerous, stressful, demanding, and requires a great deal of patience. So we created these meet your plow driver graphics. And here's an example that Shanahan sent in. So we have a form that you can fill out, that your snowplow operators can fill out with what they like about their job, what you might not know about snow plowing, and advice for drivers, just to put a face behind the people that keep our roads safe this winter.
And this is definitely something we would love to do for many more communities. If you need the link for that form, that Leah mentioned, you can drop either of us an email. I think Leah did a great job of, we've got little Shanahan's little logo on the truck and everything. So we're trying to customize these for communities so they can use them as part of their social media or outreach to their residents.
Yeah, thanks for emphasizing that. I'm still creating these graphics, so if you fill out that form, I can get those nice pictures to you. And then, so that was 2021. We're already into the new year, and I have our spring materials available, so you can start planning your spring communications. We kind of had a gap in our outreach materials about household hazardous waste, so we focused on 2 topics within that, about proper paint disposal and also vehicle fluids. One message we're going with is that, like, if you take good care of your vehicles, you also protect our waterways, because you would fix leaks right away or prevent leaks as well. That would then end up in our rivers and streams through stormwater runoff. And then we also talk about shifting to natural lawn care, because our hope is that people would reduce the amount of pesticides or herbicides and fertilizers going on lawns. And so this season we hit it from an angle of taking care of your lawn to help pollinators. And always with our blog posts, we have graphics that go along with them that you could post on Facebook or Instagram, share in an email, or put on your website. So that's what those look like. And then the culmination of our garden refresh, a native plant garden project that I talked about, is that we have these really beautiful garden plans with complete illustration and plant list, so that people can kind of get inspired. They might not create this whole plan exactly, but maybe they can take something from it. Maybe they can get a few plants that they might want to add to their yard and help our watershed that way.
Yeah, we have these both for the kind of the shady side of our building as well as the sunny side. So, really helping people to, figure out what fits for their yard and give them, different plans and options for how to take this on at home.
And then we also have, just wanted to mention our past materials. We have a lot of things on rain barrels and rain gardens and other stormwater issues. So take a look at those as well. We share all of our outreach materials on our Facebook page. So if you haven't given that a like, do so and see kind of examples about how we're using those outreach materials. And then I just wanted to mention our YouTube channel. So our member recordings go up on there, as well as our winter technical briefs that we've done the last 2 years about different de-icing techniques, and then a few more outreach related videos, like a short video on where do the leaves go or how to calibrate a walk behind salt spreader are there as well. I wanted to mention that. I believe that's it.
Yeah, yep. So this is we kind of turned to the Will County Watersheds YouTube channel. So we have links to that at probably a couple of different places from the website. Thank you, Leah.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody has any questions or comments or anything about our education outreach materials, we would definitely love to know if and how you guys are using the various materials. They're really meant to help you meet those MS4 requirements, which is kind of one of the reasons why we picked up kind of some of our spring topics, looking at household hazardous waste, because that's something that's specifically listed in the MS4 permit as far as the topic goes. So helping to provide those resources, to our community so they can meet their outreach requirements, but always open to new topics. We're currently working on our materials for summer. We should have those out by mid-March. So we're always trying to plan ahead to be able to make those materials available to you, as I'm sure you guys are planning ahead in how you're reaching out and communicating with your residents. And like I mentioned earlier, Leah and I would love to set up meetings with staff from your communities. So if you have a community relations person, the person who's sort of in charge of your MS4 reporting, love to sit down and talk with you about how we can make these materials more useful, or if there are things that we can customize, or topics that you'd really like us to cover. So kind of leave that out there. Please do contact us. And I think that wraps things up. Here's just a few dates out there. So we have our chloride committee coming up on February 15th. That meeting will be on Zoom. Again, if you're not a part of that committee and you would like to be, please do reach out to me. The Conservation Foundation is putting on the Beyond the Basics 2022, Weathering the Storm, Building Resilient Communities Through Design. There's information about that event at the Conservation Foundation's website. It'll be at the end of February. And then there's a list of our 2022 watershed group meetings. They all pretty much follow the same schedule of the fourth Thursday of the odd months, except for the very last one, because that, again, as it did last year, would have fallen on Thanksgiving. This year, I'm looking to just move it to the following week, so that we, like last year, we ended up moving the meeting a week earlier, but had to do it in the afternoon. So I think if we can move it out 1 week and do it in the morning on December 1st, I think that may work a little bit better. So that is all I have. Again, if you have any questions about things, please do reach out to us. We're happy to work with communities in any way we can to help support your outreach activities. And like I said, there'll be a lot going on this year, supporting the Narp and working on chloride issues. So expect to see emails coming from us asking for information, asking for review. And we're definitely interested in how we can put these materials together that supports our members in the best way that we can. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the meeting. If anybody has anything to add, any questions, please just feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we will go ahead and close the meeting. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and we will see you in March. Thank you.